Hi friends, Pastor Terry here. We are Okotoks Alliance Church, and this is the 10-Minute Coach. I'm looking at Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through verse 44, which is the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000 on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. And if you've been working your way through the Gospel of Mark with us, then you'll recognize kind of some bigger picture themes that I've been trying to draw our attention to. If you're discussing this with your family around a dinner table, or if you're with your life group, or you're just sitting with Jesus, having quiet time and reflecting, I'd encourage you to listen to, watch, experience the sermon from this past Sunday, where I unpacked this text. There are some very interesting kind of tie-togethers here. The wilderness theme being one that I spoke about, where this is a desolate place. The disciples describe it as we should send the people away. And that's tying that wilderness theme. In the Greek, it's the same word that was used to describe Jesus chapter 1 when he was in the wilderness. This is a wilderness theme that is kind of stirring in the hearts and the minds of the first listeners of the gospel, and kind of draws them back into, oh yeah, there was that incident in the wilderness, the Exodus, back at the beginning of the Old Testament. There were a couple of instances with Isaiah, one with Ezekiel, where God provided miraculously for prophets there. For them, this is tying something to Jesus, connecting something to Jesus that was making a profound theological statement. Jesus is a better Moses than the one who led them through the wilderness. Same God provided manna then, providing bread now. Jesus is a better prophet. He not only provided for I think it was 20 prophets that needed to be fed. God provided there. Now it's 5,000. The numbers are exaggerated, exaggerated in the sense that they're greater than. I'm not saying that they're artificial. 5,000 men, it says, plus women and children. This could be a crowd of something like 15,000 people that had made their way around the lake to find Jesus. Sheep without a shepherd, Jesus describes them. And I've offered some questions here about some of these sheep without a shepherd kinds of themes. Before I get there, though, I wanted to say there's another thread that ties together, and that's this picture of the king. You remember back in chapter 1 that Mark says that this is the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. And then it goes down to say the good news of the kingdom of God is near. That's in chapter 1, verse 15. The kingdom of God is near. So Jesus has come bringing a kingdom. And that king theme is another thread that ties it together through the Gospels. And just the most obvious one is right in chapter 6, where Herod Antipas, the king, he was never really called the king. Why does Mark call him the king here? Well, I think he's just pushing the envelope for us to say one king, aka Herod, here's how he hosted his guests. Here's the sinful environment. Here's the excess and the opulence that led to a horrific cost, him making this ridiculous pronouncement to Salome or Herodias, which she maybe goes by both names, the daughter of his wife Herodias. Makes this ridiculous promise, and it cost John the Baptist's life. Is that the king you want to follow? Is that the kind of king you want to serve? Or we get over to this next feast, this next banquet that's spread out. I mean, it's kind of interesting. In verse 39, it says, then Jesus told the disciples to have the people sit down in groups on the green grass. Well, it said it was a desolate place. Anyone who's been to Israel would know there's not a lot of green grass around that place. It's a fairly desolate. It was then, is now. Maybe it was a little greener then. Maybe this is in the spring, and that's when it took place. Or maybe Mark is kind of underscoring the beauty of this. This is the kind of spread that Jesus is making. Also interesting, verse 40, it goes on to say, so they sat down in groups of 50 or 100. I didn't talk about this on Sunday, but in John, the Gospel of John, when he recounts this, you may recall that all four Gospel writers tell us about the feeding of the 5,000. John says that immediately after his telling of it that the crowds wanted to make Jesus king. Well, it's no wonder. It's no wonder. A general who can feed 5,000 people like that is the kind of general you want to follow. Mark doesn't take us overtly there, though it's maybe inferred by the sitting them down in groups of 50 to 100. That's a regiment. That's the kind of groupings that was common for the Roman battalions. But Jesus feeds them, and then he walks on water. Okay, right? Yeah, we didn't go there this past Sunday, but that's the next passage in Mark, verse 45 to the end of the chapter 6. And this is the kind of guy you want to follow. This is the kind of guy who's got practical power. He walks on water. He makes food for his armies. Surely this is the guy that would overthrow the Roman legions, get them out of here. That's not the kind of king he is. That's not the kind of battle that he's fighting. We've been experiencing some of the spiritual, demonic battles that Jesus has had, that the disciples are invited to engage in, that we are invited to engage in. His kingdom is not of this world, he will eventually tell Pilate. And we come back and say, well, the kingdom that he's ruling and reigning in our hearts, that where we have made him sovereign of our lives, and we are responding to him. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. If you pray that or something like that on a daily basis, you are praying that you would be subject to his kingdom work. So these are the kind of things that we're seeing here in this text that is worth going with your family. It's worth going there with your small group. It's worth reflecting on the contrasts that are present and the kind of picture that is being painted. When did Jesus last meet your miraculous need? I think this is really getting to the fine point here of what's going on. The disciples just came back from a ministry tour where they were told to go out with nothing, and effectively the subtext, trust that God would provide what they needed, and they did, and He did. Now here we are, just a few chapters later, and they are confronted by this claim, the seemingly ridiculous claim of Jesus, statement of Jesus, command of Jesus, you feed them. You feed them. And we say, that seems crazy, and yet you can also look at the text and say, well, why was their memory all of a sudden so short? Hadn't he just provided? Hadn't they seen people healed? Hadn't they seen demons cast out? But it's this picture of us, right? It's the disciples, and we stand in the feet of those disciples, wanting to follow Jesus, and yet our faith so often is fickle. It so often fails us, and it's this. Where are the places that God has met you? In a miraculous way, in a providing kind of way, and how do you keep bringing those stories forward? How do you remind yourself? He's the God of the same God yesterday as he is today. He provided then, he will provide now. In the great picture, he provided then. He will provide now. I think one of the challenges for us as believers is to keep retelling the story of God's provision, his meeting us at our places of need. It's one of the reasons why worship is such an important part of the Christian's life. In our worship, we regularly retell the stories of God's provision, the way he met us in salvation, or maybe we even tell some of the Old Testament stories and we sing through a hymn or a chorus that talks about what he did as he rescued people out of Egypt and how he will rescue you. Or we take a psalm that was written reflecting on some of those things, and we re-sing that psalm in a modern vernacular. These are by the retelling of the gospel message preeminently, that Jesus has come and he has rescued us, he saved us, he loves us, he wants a relationship with us, he wants to walk with us, and he calls us to follow him and be obedient to him, even when it seems that perhaps his commands are ridiculous. And then so too is his provision. His provision defies reason. It defies logic. How could this possibly have been? And yet, the God who spoke the world into being is the one who was walking on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and he is the one who's walking with us, who indwells us as followers of Jesus, and is inviting us to be people of faith, disciples of faith. I pray that your faith will be encouraged today, that you will grow in strength as you recount how God has provided and invite him to remind you and to help you trust that you will provide knowledge, surrender to his will, trust that he is at work, the sub-elements of faith. Bless you. I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Okotoks Alliance Church, and this has been the 10-Minute Coach. Bless you, and bye for now.